My name is Andy Doyle from the Irish Farmers Journal, and I'm joined here in studio by people from the ag chem industry. And we're here because this is a particularly awkward spring, it's a late spring, and a lot of people with winter crops in particular have crops that they have not been able to get herbicide on in the autumn, and it generates a whole new set of challenges for people. So to discuss this, I'm joined by Beirne from Terrachem, who has expertise across all of the industry and across many crops, but for the products that they're selling into the market, I think at this point, mainly the broadleaf wheat sprayers at this point in time. James Byrne from Beirne. James would be, and Beirne would be selling quite a number of the autumn herbicides, things like Firebird and Alistair and stuff, targeting grass weeds, specifically the more regular ones, in particular the annual meadowgrass, the rough stock meadowgrass, etc., as well as the broadleaves. On my left, I have Chris Maughan. Chris is from TP Whelehans, and they're agents for Dow. And again, they have a range of herbicides, both grass, particularly Broadway Star, targeting, as many people will know, the whole sterile brome, specifically end of the market. And also the broadleaves. You have new actives coming in on the broadleaf weed range. And then I have Stephen Robb, who is also with us here in the Farmers Journal. So guys, the first big question is, we've 3 winter crops planted at this point in time: wheat, oats and barley. If we talk about grass weeds initially, is there anything that we can do at this point about grass weeds and barley?
I suppose from our point of view, there's very little you can do since the demise of IPU. Probably the best option you have left is use some of the autumn herbicides, which have a use update by the end of March, particularly Firebird.
By use up, you're talking about use before?
Use before, yeah. And it's the 31st of March on the Firebird label. Now, you won't get as good a control as you would have got, Andy, if you had used the pre-emerge of the grass weeds. But a lot of the grass weeds out there are only maybe at 1 small leaf, 2 leaves. And if this cold weather comes after application, you should get a reasonably good job.
I think it's probably important to put a bit of perspective on that comment, because we all know that the planting season in the autumn was equally disrupted at this point as the spring season. So we have kind of almost 3 layers of crops. Yeah. We have the crops that were planted in September, and most or all of those probably have been sprayed with something as an initial cover at this stage, which is terrific from a grassweed perspective. There may very well be broadleaves. Then we have a clutter of stuff, both barley and wheat, and possibly even some oats, that was planted in late November into December. And many of those crops, and they establish very well at this point, have little or no weeds in them. So we could possibly argue that what we have in some fields now is quite similar to what we might have had in November following an early October sown crop of another year. So we have all of these different scenarios that we have to address, and they are all very much part of it. I was out only yesterday looking through fields around the country, and I saw all combinations. The early ones with no weeds in them because they've been sprayed, ones that were probably planted sometime in October with piles of weeds in them, not sprayed, and others then planted probably early December, and nothing in the crop, just absolutely stone clean at this point. But I guess the big first question I'll ask: will those weeds still come?
Yes, there's no doubt. Just maybe from our experience, that if you got a good flush of weeds in a crop, in a spring crop, so you can mirror it back to a winter situation. A good flush in a T1 situation of weeds will be about 80%, and that will be a nearly perfect position to be in. And that never happens in winter crops. You're going to get a prolonged germination, and particularly for grasses. As you're saying, if there's 3 crops in the ground in any given crop, there's going to be 3 windows of germination that you're going to find. And if we look back and do a count on the level of winter barley that was sprayed, you get very different feedback from merchants. Like, some say very small percentages, some say a high percentage. So annual meadowgrass, rough stock meadowgrass are going to be issues enough in the fields they're in, and it's been wet, so they will be slow to germinate. They've been wet and cold.
One question that kind of leads instantly from there: will we get different weeds, particularly broadleaf weeds, coming now than we might normally get?
I think we're going to get a lot more polygonum weeds, the likes of the spring weeds, the dead nettles, those kind of weeds
red
are going
shanks,
to come.
poppies, the kind of
Yeah.
normal weeds that we get in the spring crop. If stuff comes, that is more likely to be those, because that may explain to some people why they'll end up with a problem they weren't expecting, that they end up with actually different weeds in the field.
And I think that is particular to this year because we've had such cold weather. We're going to get cold weather now for another week, so we'll be into the end of March. The crops haven't started growing. There's no fertiliser gone out in them, so there's going to be a lot of light hitting the soil and no crop cover to help protect against weed germination.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll see that if you, when you're driving the country, you'll see that the amount of groundsel that's apparent in crops now, or even volunteer beans, seems to be way lower than an average year. And we know it's going to come, but we just with the temperatures, as James was saying, temperatures and moisture, the ground is just so cold. But they will come. There's no doubt about that.
That was my belief as well, that they will come. It's not anybody selling chemicals that
no
believes that.
It's there.
We don't not have weed problems.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, slipping back again very quickly to the winter barley question. Basically, if this was 2017, March 2017, we all know what we would be doing in the barley, because then we could legally have used IPU with other substances to try and get a good broadleaf control, broadleaf and grass control. Then we don't have that option legally this year. So flufenicet is one option. It may be less than we'd get if we had it on in the autumn, but it may be the best we can do.
Yeah.
Could anybody comment on the use of tower as a possible option at this stage, bringing in the other actives? Would it be useful at this stage? I know it's unfair, it's not your products, but
pendimethalin is in tower, so pendimethalin post-emergence, that 1/3 of the mix won't do.
Providing if you have no weeds on the ground.
If you've no weeds, anything that's above ground, pendimethalin won't do anything else. So, and there will be a percentage, as we just said, there's a percentage coming through. Yeah. So anything that's up, and even at needle, one single leaf up on an annual meadowgrass, and it's hard to see that. You really have to be determined to go out and see that. So that element of it won't be. The DFF element will have effect.
We'll do a little bit, especially on chickweed and speedwells.
On the broadleaves.
But then again, stay on the grasses and it'll do something, but not a lot.
We'll come back to that again on the winter wheat conversation, but on barley, so it's really looking at flufenicet, Firebird, and let it do what it will and hope for the best.
It's probably the best option.
I think another thing that we have, particularly if you had a very early sown barley crop at the moment, a lot of them, they flushed out very well to cover the ground, and actually hitting the target weeds if they're there is also a challenge in itself, I'm guessing, at this stage.
Yeah, very much so.
Okay, so look at that. That's where we are on barley. People have all the options in the world. If it's just broadleaves that you're going after, if you happen to be lucky not to have any number of grass weeds there, they may come. But if your barley is on top, at least you're keeping them where you wanted them under the crop. If you don't have an option at this stage, so we move to wheat, and if we go then to the wheat crop, that the one I saw yesterday evening, which is typical, this would be a crop probably planted sometime in October. Kind of three tillers on the plant, spreading out fairly well. Small leaves, probably Diego in the field. Grass at three, meadowgrass at 3 tillers on the plant. All kinds of a description of poppy in the field, chickweed coming out in your ears. What can we consider going in there with?
Well, I suppose from a buyer point of view, we have meso-based products, Pacifica Plus, Alistair, and a new one called Monolith. But in the crop you're talking about now, where you're not specifically going after, say blackgrass or brome, your Alistair Flex to me is the perfect option, because not only are you getting the DFF on for residual activity, but you're also getting grassweed control from meso and wild oat control.
Okay, so that's the grassweed package. Chris, you have solutions for grassweeds as well, but you have a limitation with Broadway Star, because you can't, with Broadway alone, tackle annual meadowgrass, which worries most people, not because it's always the biggest yield robber, but because it's bloody nuisance at combining time, and that's what drive a lot of people to try and chase it.
The unfortunate thing is that Broadway Star won't control annual meadowgrass.
Yeah.
So there will be some of the early crops which will have some grassweed control on, whether they got a residual on post-emergent. So some of the annual meadowgrass will be controlled there. In those situations, Broadway Star is the ideal one. For the other grassweeds like sterile brome, control all the species, the sterile brome, soft brome, meadow brome, and if there's ryegrass there as well. So that's an ideal opportunity there, and it'll bring in those other weeds like wild oats and broadleaf weeds as well. That could be there as well, so it would be a good option. I suppose in the fire brigade situation where sterile brome is quite bad and there is annual meadowgrass, some people would be mixing, like what James mentioned there, the Alistair Flex or Pacifica Plus at a lower rate to control annual meadowgrass along with Broadway Star, but you're getting into big money and expense at that stage. But they would be in situations where sterile brome is quite bad.
Can I ask everybody, in terms of places where you believe the right thing to do is to mix, how sensitive are the rates in the products you might put into the mix, whether it's Broadway Star with Alistair? I mean, to make the combination work, and Chris is using Alistair with Broadway, how you can't afford not to get the job done. Yeah. So how far can you cut rate of any or either product?
But generally, we wouldn't be recommending cutting the rate too much. You know,
if you're chasing sterile broom, you don't have a lot of options.
That is exactly it, Andy. Sterile broom, you cannot really cut the rates. Yeah. I would say a minimum of 0.8 of Alistair, which is a reduction from a litre as the rate you should be using at this time of the year, with probably 0.6 off the Broadway Star.
Yeah, it's 265 grams. It's a 4 hectare pack. We wouldn't recommend reducing the Broadway either. Generally, look, if sterile brome is only isn't too bad, you'd probably just run with one of the products on its own. But in fire brigade situations where brome is bad, especially after common min-till situations where it is quite bad and quite well established, there is the benefit from mixing the two of them to give you that fire brigade job where you don't have a residual on before that.
Okay.
Where you didn't get say flufenicet type products on in the autumn time or pendimethalin on.
Chris, when you say not too bad, are we talking about a situation where you don't have many plants, or the plants are not so big? Because big brome plants are fair animals.
Yeah, well, it'd be where you don't have too many plants. You know? And I suppose the key is you'd love to be going out spraying sterile brome from the middle of March on, but you can't really spray with the conditions we have now, and especially with the forecast.
I think that's something that we've seen over the last few years, that the earlier you get in on sterile brome or the bits of blackgrass that are around, you get much better control. The fire brigade thing of going in the end of April, even into May, you're really struggling, and you're going to put these products under pressure because they are sulfonylureas. I think you'll agree, Chris. And if we start going out there, they will go like some of the other broadleaf weeds, and we will have resistance issues.
So while temperature is always said to be an issue, experience is telling us that it's less of an issue than waiting and allowing the weeds to get very big. Correct. Because then they become just more difficult to kill.
Yeah.
Okay, that's important. Gary?
Just wondering, because we're not in the brome market, so just the view of putting on wetters with it or tank mixing, if you're putting a two-way tank mix in currently, and there's a need for an apeside, though that's currently not that likely, but there's a need for an apeside in the next 10 days, or do you promote wetters with it, or would you recommend wetters with it, just for the grass and try to get as much product stuck to grass as possible?
Well, we always recommend with both Specific Plus and with Monolith that you should be using biopower with it, because the formulation is such that the adjuvants and wetters weren't put into the formulation because it is a powder.
It's been a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, and the very same with Broadway Star. It's torpedo if you're using it on its own, or if the biopower is going in, you certainly would choose one of them to go in. You know, and I suppose one of the key is with certainly with Broadway Star is the ingredient has to get into growing point within 24 or 48 hours. It has to get in there quick, otherwise it'll break down. It's quite a short half-life on it, so it's important to use the adjuvants in order to get to help to get the chemical into the plant and into the growing point to work.
And we know with something like a target like sterile brome, it's a kind of somewhat hairy leaf, and that itself is an obstacle to penetration. Is there anything to suggest that perhaps more adjuvant is advantageous? We know some weeds that we tackle that are challenging, broadleaves that are challenging, and extra adjuvant is really helping. Do we know that for sterile brome as a target?
Yeah, no, certainly we know what Broadway Star, there is the benefit from including an adjuvant, absolutely.
Pushing the rate up, going above?
No, generally you go with the label recommendation. It's, I know with torpedo, it's 1 litre per 1,000, so it's 0.1%. There is no benefit for increasing that. So a lot of adjuvants work in terms of their concentration of the water, irrespective of water volume, and that's the important thing.
So if we then just change the tack slightly and say for the odd person, and hopefully they're only a relatively odd person that have blackgrass that they have to try and deal with chemically, and if they have sensitive blackgrass, and we hope they have, what are the options that people can consider?
Well, from our stable, you're really looking at Pacifica Plus or Monolith, and at label rates with biopower. And from what we've seen so far, even though some of the grasses that have been tested have been resistant, so-called resistant blackgrass, they're still being controlled by that level of SU.
And that level, when you say label rate, the label rate for blackgrass is much higher than the label rate for annual meadowgrass. Is it 500 grams, 600 grams?
It's 500 grams.
500 grams per hectare.
Plus,
that's 500 grams of active or of product.
Product.
Yeah. Okay. Do you do anything on black grass?
Broadway Star wouldn't be or black grass wouldn't.
It's
be
not its strength.
No, it wouldn't be.
Okay,
its strength, yeah.
okay. I mean, others then will have issues with canary grass.
Well, the meso products are not good on canary grass.
So it's back to using axial in the main for
anymore,
those, which is back to general. Wild oats for people that, if you are using the combination of Broadway Star and Alistair, would you expect to have wild oats coming through? Should it do a good enough job?
Oh, definitely no. Broadway Star, even at a reduced rate, would 80% rate would do a very good job on wild oats, and also the cultivated oats that are coming through as well.
So that's important for people, because you seem as if you're spending a lot of money, but if you're taking out a spray somewhere else, your overall herbicide bill would still be very much in control.
And then Broadway will pull in a lot of broadleaf weeds as well. You know, including volunteer beans, volunteer oilseed rape, and other ones there. So you would need very little else when you're using something like Broadway Star.
Okay, we're going to flick across to just one last grassweed scenario, and that is the one where I was in yesterday evening, where we have a crop of wheat at a 2-leaf stage. There's absolutely nothing in the field.
That's where I see the likes of Alistair, where you have some residual activity coming in. The danger with all these products is that if you go on and there is nothing there, because they are mainly contact. All SUs are mainly contact, so you need the grass weeds there. That is not to say we haven't got very good results, I know, particularly from using Alistair in the autumn, which we can't explain, but it seems to do a job. But that could be down to the DFF, because at a litre you're getting 120 grams of DFF on. So look, you have to be careful, and you need a residual component in going this early on a crop where there is nothing there.
Would PDN work in that scenario? Would it contribute something really?
Of course it would,
I was just thinking what James did there, but I know when DuPont had a product called Lexus, and when they were doing work on that, they found that the initial recommendations were based on 1 leaf was your ideal timing. What they actually found when they went at a peri-emergent stage, so when the seedling had just chitted out but was still below ground level, that the ALS chemistry, which is that family of chemistry, was actually given better control at a subsoil level than it was at a post-emergence level, even though it's a contact acting material. So there's something to ALS chemistry just before stuff breaks through the soil. You're getting a good degree of control of particularly of meadowgrass.
When you were using that, you'd have been targeting grasses. Would it have the same effect on residual effect on the broadleaves? Because the
half-life was quite short.
Okay.
That's where as a residual, that's where it fell down.
So you'd be depending on the weed coming at the same time as the grass was coming, as the cereal itself was coming.
Yeah, and usually the annual grass was ahead of the broadleaf weeds, so you got that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chris, I know from visiting your trials in recent years that where you were going on with Broadway Star, that it seemed to be preferable a number of times in experiences to have had something on preceding the Broadway Star. So if you were going with Broadway Star alone now on a crop that has just sterile brome, would you still be tempted to try and put something in there to further help, or does it really matter if it's a tank mix rather than a previous spray?
No, for sterile bulb control in bad situations, the best solution is to have something on in the autumn.
Okay,
it is the best. Yeah. Now, if that's not there and you're not there, unfortunately, there's very little you can do. So the only thing we would say in those, as we talk about where weeds are quite bad or brome is quite large, is to mix with the Alistair Plus or the Pacifica Plus at a stage there where you think it's quite bad. But ideally, a farmer should be looking to tackle his sterile brome with some part of the component in the autumn and following up with a spring application. That's what we found from the work in Straffan.
No, and I think I would agree with Chris Andy that to get the best level of control, there's 2 components to it. The first one is that you're disposing the weed to the SU by having a herbicide on.
You're sensitizing it.
You're sensitizing it basically. Yeah. And the second thing is, from a resistance management point of view, another active is in there. Okay. So you're helping to delay the onset of resistance.
Because we have to be conscious all the time of the pressures that are coming from there.
Yeah.
Stephen, can I ask you before we move on, Donegal, your home part of the country, did fellas get out on land in the autumn with herbicides?
Oh, very little.
Okay.
Yeah, it's much the same as the rest of the country, despite a bit of a reversal this spring. So I would imagine we'll see guys out in the field cleaning up bits and pieces within the next couple of days.
So you can still get out, you can travel
basically. We'll get out now, but no, very, very little weed control in the autumn, much the same as the rest of the country.